The desert town of Ferron Hollow lay sprawled like a rusted scar across the cracked earth, where the wind howled through the jagged remnants of old steel and bone-dry scrub. Most days moved like dust, slow and unnoticed, until the day the sky opened and the ground remembered what it had buried. Elias Thorne worked alone in a garage that looked more like a scrapyard shrine than a place of business. Hulking engine parts, stripped rotors, and tangled cables framed the warped tin structure like ribs around a mechanical heart. To the townsfolk, Elias was a recluse with grease-stained hands and strange ideas. He didn't speak much, didn't smile often, but he was reliable with a wrench, and in Ferron Hollow, that was enough to keep people from asking questions. No one knew what waited beneath the garage floor, what pulsed beneath the reinforced steel trapdoor hidden under a rusted shelving unit. Down there, where the air was cool and the hum of circuitry echoed like whispered secrets, Elias had built a sanctuary. It was where Voltairen slept. The dragon was unlike anything drawn in storybooks or seen in war zones. Its scales shimmered a deep cobalt, veined with filaments of silver and carbon that glowed softly in darkness. Wings like burnished armor curled at its sides, and its chest bore a reactor core Elias had embedded years ago, salvaged from a broken military drone and re-engineered to pulse in sync with the dragon's heartbeat. Voltairen was not born of nature or machine alone, but balanced between the two, an orphan of forgotten technology and ancient fire. Elias had found the hatchling tangled in copper coils and scorched rubber deep in a scrapyard ravine, eyes clouded, body broken. He hadn't planned to raise it, but something in the way it had looked at him, feral, terrified, alive, had anchored itself in his soul. In the years that followed, they forged a wordless companionship. Voltairen grew under Elias' care, learning tools, mimicking gestures, even understanding tonal shifts in his voice. They spoke in glances, gestures, and the hum of energy. Sometimes, when Elias worked late, the dragon would curl behind him, its warm breath vibrating through the floor like a second heartbeat. He had taught it to power generators with a tap of its claw, to disarm traps, to remain hidden. Above ground, Elias wore solitude like armor. Below, he had purpose. But secrets have weight, and Ferron Hollow had always been too small to keep them buried forever. Trouble arrived in silence. Drones shaped like locusts, gliding past the horizon line. Too smooth, too quiet. Argon Corps had been probing border towns for months, their interest in outlaw tech growing ever more aggressive. A salvage drone picked up a blip, an unnatural energy spike deep below Elias' shop. In their command towers, analysts leaned in. Something powerful, something unregistered, something worth taking. Elias noticed the men 2 days before they acted, strangers who asked too few questions at the bar, who wore civilian clothes too neatly. They watched his shop from a distance. They asked the wrong people the wrong things. And worst of all, someone answered. It wasn't hard to guess who. The town's drunkard, Marcus Dell, had once begged Elias for a cut of whatever tech he was hiding back there. Elias had said nothing. Dell needed cash, and Argon Corps offered enough to forget morals. They came at dusk. The sky was a smear of bruised violet when the black trucks rolled in, wheels hissing over sand. Elias heard the low-frequency pulse before he saw the first soldier. Cloaked in reflective armor and silence fields, they surrounded the garage like wolves circling a tired stag. The front door splintered in seconds. He fought, not with fists, but by triggering the failsafes, slamming fists into console buttons, initiating vault locks, shouting to Voltairen through the comlink embedded in his collar. Go dark, go deep, but they were faster. They dropped a net of magnetic stasis over the underground chamber before Voltairen could react. The dragon shrieked, not in pain, but in confusion, as its limbs froze, suspended mid-motion, wings flickering with trapped charge. Its reactor core dimmed under the field's pressure, pulsing slower and slower like a dying star. Elias lunged toward the control panel, but an electric baton cracked across his ribs. He collapsed, vision spinning, the air tasting like copper. Through blurred eyes, he saw Voltairen's tail thrash once before going limp. They don't die easy, one of the soldiers muttered. That's the problem. No kill order, another barked. Containment only. It goes under. Elias tried to speak, to scream, but the pain flattened his breath. They dragged him outside, leaving him crumpled like scrap. A crater was already being dug by autonomous drills, fast, efficient, cruel. They lowered Voltiron's stasis-locked body into the pit like they were disposing of toxic waste. Overhead, lightning stitched across the sky, a storm rolling in as if summoned. The earth closed in minutes. No gravestone, no record, just sand, heat, and silence. The trucks vanished into the night. Elias lay where they left him, broken and gasping. Somewhere in the distance, thunder cracked. Beneath the ground, something ancient and augmented stirred. And though the desert seemed still, Ferron Hollow had just buried the one thing that could never stay buried. The storm was only beginning. Darkness pressed against Voltiron like a second skin, thick, soundless, unyielding. He could not move, not fully. The stasis field pinned his wings, froze his limbs, and reduced his world to a blue-tinged blur. Yet somewhere beyond the suffocating field and layers of crushed earth above, he felt it, the storm. Lightning sang in frequencies too high for human ears, but to Voltiron, it was a chorus. Each bolt was a voice calling out to him, not just noise, but energy, power, memory. He reached for it with a thought, but the field strangled the response. His chest core flickered like a candle caught in a vacuum. Still, he remembered Elias. Fragments drifted through the haze, a voice thick with resolve, the taste of metal in the air above the workbench, the warmth of a human hand steadying a damaged wing. The bond was more than care. Elias had built part of him, infused machine into scale and bone, not just to repair, but to connect. They shared neural resonance, a biosynthetic link forged over years of quiet, unnoticed devotion. Now the signal was distant, muffled, fading. Voltiron's heart, both organic and engineered, beat against the silence. Pain was the first thing to return. A flicker in the tail joint, a pulse of warmth in the hind leg. The stasis was weakening. It had not accounted for the storm. The energy rolling above, the thunder that cracked like bone, the lightning that drilled into the sand, was beginning to interact with the core in ways Argon Core hadn't predicted. With each surge, Voltiron's systems recalibrated. A failsafe deep within his hybrid nervous system activated. A forgotten line of Elias code written in desperation and hope. If buried, draw from sky. The command looped. If buried, draw from sky. A single bolt struck the desert, miles away, but Voltiron felt it as if it had kissed his own spine. Energy seeped through fractured earth and diffused particles, brushing against the limits of his awareness. A claw twitched. The membrane of his wings shimmered faintly. His optics began to burn, twin beacons in the dark. The dirt above him shifted. He remembered falling. No, being lowered, like refuse. He remembered betrayal. Heat coiled in his throat. Not fire, but fusion. His chest core spun slowly at first, then faster, cycling energy into dormant systems. A grinding sound echoed inside his skull. Metal against metal, circuits realigning. His wings began to flex. The weight of the earth was immense, but Voltiron had carried heavier burdens. Rage, fear, the abandonment of knowing Elias was above, wounded, or worse. That was heavier than soil. So he pushed. The stasis net crackled as energy began to feed back through its own lattice. Voltiron absorbed it, letting the charge spiral through his limbs like lightning down a wire. The containment shell had a limit. Everything did. The earth above began to glow, faintly at first, an unnatural blue light like a heartbeat rising through the sand. Then came the quake. It began as a whisper, a tremor too small to notice in a land used to subtle movements. But it grew. Rock shifted. Cracks webbed outward from the buried crater. The sand over Voltiron's body exploded upward in a sudden, violent bloom. In a flash, lightning speared from the clouds above, connecting with the earth in a column of incandescent fury. From that radiant stormfront, he emerged. Voltiron burst from the ground like a living thunderclap, wings slicing through the ash-heavy air, talons carving the crater's edge. The mechanical core at his chest pulsed like a miniature star, lighting the night in pulses of cerulean fire. Every plate of armor, every scale and vein, glowed with raw power drawn from the storm itself. His roar split the sky. Ferron Hollow saw the light before they heard the sound. A pillar of electricity arced upward, then burst like fireworks across the low-hanging clouds. The ground rolled as the blast flattened nearby scrub and sent debris skittering across the desert. Animals fled, machines powered down, and every drone Argon core left behind blinked out as if extinguished by a thought. Voltiron stood in the center of the crater, wings outstretched, breath steaming against the chill air. The storm answered him, one bolt, then another. Each time, he drank in the charge. Not mindlessly, but deliberately. His processors ran hot, recalibrating systems, upgrading responses. He was adapting. He remembered the soldiers, their voices, their weapons. He remembered the sting of betrayal, not just by them, but by the people of Ferron Hollow who had let them in. The ones Elias had once helped without asking for payment. The ones who had watched silently as the trucks rolled out. His wings snapped once, then folded. Voltiron turned east, where the remnants of the convoy had vanished. He could feel the path they'd taken. Vehicles leave echoes, machines leave scars. He followed. In the sand, his prints glowed. Hours passed, though he did not tire. He moved with the quiet grace of a creature born for both war and silence. Storm clouds followed overhead, drawn like a cloak across the stars. Near dawn, he reached the outskirts of the ridge, the place they had thrown Elias. His sensors flared. A shallow depression, blood dried into rust at the edges. Nearby, a trail of boot prints and something dragged. His optics zoomed in, scanned. Found. 200 meters away, crumpled against a ravine wall, lay Elias. Voltiron sprinted. His claws tore the earth, turbines along his spine flaring to accelerate each bound. He reached the broken figure and slowed. The mechanic's face was pale, lips cracked, breath shallow. The connection between them, once vibrant, was dim, like a channel half closed. Voltiron knelt. He didn't cry. Dragons don't cry. But the energy in his core pulsed erratically, a signal of distress that lit the rocks around them in soft blue hues. Elias stirred. Barely. His eyelids fluttered. He didn't speak, but one hand rose, trembling, and brushed against the dragon's warm chest. Voltiron responded by shifting his posture, aligning the reactor over Elias' heart. A small panel opened in the core, revealing a transfer port, a last-ditch system they had never tested. Now was the time. Energy moved in silence, guided by need, by design, by something deeper than programming. Elias gasped as the current touched him. Not painful, not electric, but life-giving. His back arched once, and then he stilled. The color returned to his face slowly, like sunrise pushing away night. He opened his eyes. You're still here. Voltiron only nodded, crouching lower. The wind picked up again. Elias's fingers dug weakly into the dragon's scale. Then we're not finished. And no, they were not. Far beyond the ridge, Argon Core was regrouping, unaware of what they had just unleashed. The storm was no longer overhead. It was alive, walking on claws and wrapped in scales. And now it remembered. The world returned slowly to Elias Thorne. Each breath was a struggle, a battle between pain and purpose. The desert dawn glared at him through cracked lids, and the scent of scorched ozone still clung to the air. Voltiron stood vigil beside him, massive and unmoving, like a statue carved from stormlight. The faint blue glow from the dragon's reactor core lit the canyon walls, throwing dancing shadows around them. Elias stirred. His ribs screamed with protest, but he sat up with the stubbornness of someone who had endured worse. His hand, trembling but alive, reached out and touched Voltiron's side. Warmth radiated through the metal-infused scales. There was comfort in that warmth. More than comfort, clarity. He was not alone. What did they do to you? Elias asked, voice raw. Voltiron did not answer with sound, but his head dipped low, wings folding in tight. His luminous eyes locked with Elias, and in that silence, a torrent of shared memory passed between them. The betrayal, the burial, the storm's resurrection. Elias saw it all as if he'd lived it too, the neural link sparking to life, stronger than before. They wanted to bury you, Elias muttered. Like waste, like you didn't matter. He clenched his fists, rage swelling under his bruises. They were wrong. The bond crackled, and Elias felt it deep in his chest, the dragon's energy, restless, waiting. They had both been broken, both tossed aside by a world that feared what it didn't understand. But together, they had endured. Now, something new filled the space between them. not just survival. Resolve. The wind shifted. From the east, the scent of oil and synthetic fiber rode the breeze. Argon core. They hadn't retreated far. Perhaps they believed their mission complete. Perhaps they'd stayed to collect data, to clean up loose ends. Either way, they remained close. Too close. Elias leaned heavily against Voltiron's flank and stood, wincing. His body was a collection of aches and torn ligaments, but his mind was sharp. He scanned the ridgeline, eyes narrowing. We don't have long before they realize their mistake. Voltiron's wings trembled slightly, itching to move. I know you want to strike, Elias said, reading the tension in the dragon's stance. But not yet. We need to be smart about this. They're more than just soldiers. They're engineers, tacticians. If we rush in, they'll pin us down again. The dragon's tail lashed the ground, kicking up dust. But if we dismantle them from the inside, Elias said, a cold glint in his eye, they won't see it coming. They moved under cover of the remaining storm clouds. Elias rode light on Voltiron's back, secured by the harness he'd built years ago for emergency escapes, though this was no escape. They avoided major roads, using gorges and dunes as natural cover. Voltiron adjusted his electromagnetic signature, his energy core mimicking a passive state to stay beneath radar. Argon Core's desert base wasn't much to look at. Prefab structures bolted into the sand, surrounded by automated sentry turrets and sensor towers. But Elias recognized the architecture. Modular, vulnerable to overload. He'd built similar systems before he walked away from the corporations and their cold, calculated wars. As they crouched behind a rock outcrop overlooking the encampment, Elias reviewed his plan aloud. They'll have a core controller near the main building. White structure, 2 antennas. That's where the AI net resides. We kill that, we blind everything else. Voltiron's gaze flicked toward the building, then to the perimeter patrols. His claws flexed, crackling faintly. But we need a way in, Elias added, voice tight. A distraction. Voltiron snorted quietly and stepped back. With a low rumble, he unfurled one wing and began to beat the air in rhythmic pulses. Dust kicked up, then more, forming a low-frequency signal. Elias blinked, recognizing the pattern. A mimic protocol. Voltiron was replicating the energy readings of a smaller drone, a damaged one, specifically. Elias grinned despite himself. You brilliant beast. They sent the signal skittering across the sand like a lost drone beacon. Within minutes, 2 soldiers approached in a desert skiff, their helmets flickering with heads-up displays. They spoke in clipped tones, scanning the area. Elias waited until they dismounted and began inspecting the signal origin point, now an empty patch of sand marked by a faint scorch. Voltiron struck from behind the rocks, silent as wind. His claws crushed one soldier's chest plate in a single strike, while Elias lunged at the other, a makeshift blade drawn from scrap metal and vengeance. The second soldier choked out a warning, but it was too late. Elias silenced him. Now they had uniforms, IDs, access chips. Voltiron shrunk his posture and cloaked his reactor. Elias, suited in the fallen soldier's gear, walked toward the main gate, dragging a crate that contained the illusion of salvage. Mangled drone parts, scorched but inert. Voltiron followed in stealth, his steps mirroring the low hum of the desert skiff's wheels. The gate guards barely glanced up. Inside, the camp was a cold machine of efficiency, tents, data stations, drones in various stages of repair. Engineers worked in silence, and every few meters, a turret blinked red in idle readiness. Elias moved with purpose, his stolen uniform a second skin. He reached the command building's rear and placed a palm on the sensor pad. It beeped in acknowledgement. He slipped inside. The AI core room was smaller than expected, built for utility, not ceremony. It sat like a brain in a jar, black casing, humming softly, surrounded by touch panels. 2 technicians looked up as Elias entered. You're not on this cycle, one said, frowning. Elias nodded once. Emergency directive. Core diagnostics. Fluctuation detected. The technician opened his mouth to protest, but then came the sound, faint at first, then louder. A low, rising growl, like thunder gathering beneath the floor. The walls shuddered. Then the explosion. A plume of blue light burst from the far end of the camp as Voltiron dropped his stealth field and launched into the air, his wings ripping through a guard tower. Screams followed. Panic. The camp descended into chaos. Inside the AI room, Elias moved. He struck the first technician in the throat with a precise jab, sending him crashing into the server wall. The second drew a sidearm, but Elias ducked, twisted, and drove his blade into the man's side. He didn't wait to watch him fall. He reached the AI core, pulled the override chip from his stolen uniform, and jammed it into the port. The screen blinked, then welcomed him. Command, the core asked in a pleasant, lifeless tone. Deactivate all surveillance and automated defenses. Confirm identity. Override protocol Thorn 17. A pause. Confirmed. Outside, the base went dark. Voltiron howled, arcing a torrent of plasma breath across the skiffs. Elias watched the flames dance across the night, lighting the dragon's outline in glory and ruin. It was beautiful, terrifying, necessary. Within minutes, the camp lay silent. Those who weren't dead had fled. Elias limped from the control center, his borrowed armor cracked and bloodied. Voltiron landed beside him, panting, wings folding like curtains of dusk. They looked at each other. No words passed between them. None were needed. But Elias felt the shift. This was no longer just about survival. This was about retribution. About sending a message not just to Argon Core, but to anyone who thought they could bury what they didn't. The wind tore through Ferron Hollow with a sharpness that foretold something unnatural. Dust curled in the alleyways, whispering warnings to doors bolted shut and windows shuttered tight. The townspeople no longer met in the streets. They spoke in hushed fragments behind thick walls, as if silence might delay the retribution they knew was coming. It had been 3 days since Argon Core's desert outpost vanished. No wreckage was recovered. No survivors emerged. Only a crater remained, blackened and fused to glass, humming faintly with residual energy. The official statement blamed a reactor malfunction. But those who had seen the sky pulse blue and heard the sound like 1,000 roaring furnaces knew better. They remembered the dragon. They remembered Elias. In the outskirts, at the threshold where cracked asphalt surrendered to sand, a shape emerged from the glare. Voltiron walked beside Elias, the ground trembling beneath each footfall. The dragon had diminished nothing in power, but now moved with a chilling stillness, calculated and coiled. Beside him, Elias walked straight-backed, clad in modified combat leathers, his left arm supported by a metallic brace of his own design. He no longer limped. Pain had been sublimated into purpose. They did not announce their arrival. They didn't need to. The town center, once a hub of trade and mechanic barter, stood empty save for the council. 5 figures arrayed in formal dress that had never quite shed the dust of the desert. Mayor Harrow stood at the forefront, shoulders tense beneath his regulation coat, face pale but defiant. Behind him, guards lined the square, each one stiff with the knowledge that their rifles were ornamental. Elias stopped 10 paces from the mayor, Voltiron pausing just behind him. The dragon's eyes glowed like smoldering coals, the kind that burned long after the flame. "You should be dead," Harrow said, the words brittle. Elias tilted his head, as if the statement lacked meaning. "So should your conscience. Yet here we are. You don't understand the pressure we faced," the mayor continued. "Argon Core. You sold us both," Elias interrupted. "You gave them access. You gave them my research. You told them where to find Voltiron. You gave them the shovel." There was a pause. "I kept this town alive," Harrow said, voice trembling. "Do you think sentiment builds roads? That affection powers generators? We had no choice." Voltiron stepped forward. A single movement, but every weapon in the square was raised in response. The dragon made no sound. He didn't have to. His presence was the declaration. Elias raised a hand, and the guards froze, not from command, but from fear. His voice was quiet when he spoke next. "I came here to offer a choice." Harrow blinked. "A choice? I know what Argon Core was after. They didn't want to destroy Voltiron. They wanted to control him. The neural lattice, the fusion engine, the adaptive AI, they couldn't replicate it. So they thought to dismantle it, piece by piece. Study it like a cadaver." Elias's hand dropped to his side, brushing against a metallic canister secured to his belt. But Voltiron isn't a machine. He's not a weapon. He's a being. One who chose to protect when he could have annihilated. The mayor's voice hardened. "And what is it you're offering? Forgiveness?" "No," Elias said flatly. "A reckoning. You can either stand with us, or remain under the illusion that your deals will save you when Argon Core sends the next wave. The silence that followed was complete. Then a sound broke it, slow, deliberate clapping. A figure stepped forward from the edge of the square, dressed in a military coat stripped of insignia, his face marked by old plasma burns and eyes like scorched steel. General Vas Korin, once Argon Core's chief of acquisition, now somehow free. You always were dramatic, Elias, Korin said, voice dry. But I'll admit, this entrance has a certain poetry. Voltiron's wings rose slightly. Elias's fingers twitched. How did you survive the blast? Elias asked, stepping between Korin and the townspeople. Korin's smile barely curved. You think a man in my position wouldn't prepare a failsafe? What you destroyed was a shell. The real work was deeper. Subterranean. He tapped a small device clipped to his wrist. Argon Core's not dead. It's evolving. And you've proven something I could never replicate. He gestured toward Voltiron. True synthesis. Human and dragon. Flesh and circuitry. But you still think too small. You think vengeance closes the book. I'm writing a new one. Elias narrowed his eyes. And what's the title? Extinction. Followed by rebirth. Without warning, the device on Korin's wrist flared. The ground beneath them cracked. From beneath the council hall, a thunderous roar answered. Lower, artificial, but terrifyingly familiar. A new form climbed through the rupture. Massive, quadrupedal, plated in black chrome, its eyes lit with violet circuitry. Not a dragon, an imitation. Argon Core's idea of perfection. Voltiron snarled. The synthetic beast answered with a deafening screech and lunged. What followed was chaos. Voltiron leapt, meeting the creature in midair with a crash that rippled outward like a bomb. They rolled, claws slashing, tails whipping stone and fire into the air. Elias dove, dragging Harrow out of the blast zone as the council scattered. The machine was fast, too fast. Its claws were serrated plasma blades. Its body was modular, constantly shifting, adapting to blows. But Voltiron had what it never could: instinct, memory, emotion, and fury. He drove the synthetic back with a burst of nuclear breath, melting a portion of its side. It responded by jabbing a retractable spike into his flank, causing Voltiron to shriek in pain. Elias reached for his belt, pulled the canister, and twisted the cap. A sonic surge burst forth. The synthetic froze, if only for a second, its equilibrium thrown off by the pulse frequency. Voltiron seized the moment. With a lunge born of agony and resolve, he sank his claws into the creature's chest and ripped upward, exposing the core, a pale, artificial mockery of life. With a final bellow, Voltiron blasted the heart with everything left in him. The machine convulsed and fell silent. Ash drifted in the aftermath. Smoke curled into the sky like offerings. Korin was gone. Only his echo remained. Elias approached Voltiron, who swayed but stood tall. Blood leaked from several gashes, but his eyes were clear. Focused. You okay? Elias asked. The dragon nudged him gently, a low hum vibrating from his chest. Together, they turned back to the broken square. The guards had lowered their weapons. The townspeople emerged from hiding. No one cheered. No one spoke. But something in the air shifted, like fear breaking. Or perhaps awe. Elias faced them, exhausted but unwavering. This place can be more than a footnote in some corporate report. But not if you wait for someone to save you. You build. You protect. Or you perish. He looked to the horizon, where dark clouds still brood. They'll come again. Argon Core. Others. But next time, we won't wade in the dirt. Voltiron opened his wings, casting a long shadow over Ferron Hollow. He wasn't buried anymore. He had risen, and the world would never forget.